Story 1. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over our quiet Farmingdale neighborhood. Leaves danced whimsically in the brisk October breeze, and I could hear the distant laughter of children as they prepared for Halloween. It was my favorite time of year, but this season felt different. There was an underlying tension in the air that I couldn't quite shake. "Mom, can we put the skeleton in the yard?" Derek's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I turned to see him standing there, his lanky frame dressed in a faded black hoodie, his hair disheveled. "Sure, Derek. Just be careful with it." I smiled, trying to mask my concern. Derek had always loved Halloween, but lately his enthusiasm felt forced. There was an unsettling edge to his excitement that made my heart race. As we worked together, I stole glances at him, noting the way his fingers trembled as he secured the skeleton to the porch. "You all right, buddy?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Yeah, just tired," he replied, avoiding my gaze. I could feel the weight of his words hang between us, a reminder of the struggles he faced. He had always been sensitive, but in recent months it felt like a storm was brewing beneath his surface. "Maybe we could watch a movie tonight? Something classic?" I suggested, hoping to ease the tension. "Like what?" he asked, finally looking at me. His eyes held a flicker of interest, but it quickly vanished. "Maybe Hocus Pocus or something spooky?" I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. He shrugged. "I don't know, whatever." His nonchalance stung, but I pressed on, determined to connect. "All right, let's finish up here, and then I'll make some popcorn." I tried to keep my tone upbeat, but I could feel the familiar knot of worry tightening in my stomach. As the evening wore on, the chill in the air deepened, and the shadows began to stretch. We had just finished placing the last of our decorations when Derek suddenly snapped. "Why do you care so much about Halloween?" he shouted, his voice echoing into the night. I flinched at his outburst, a mix of surprise and hurt coursing through me. "Derek, it's just supposed to be fun. I thought you liked it." "Fun? You think this is fun?" he shot back, gesturing wildly at the decorations. "You don't understand anything." "Stop it!" I raised my voice, my patience wearing thin. "I'm trying to make this special for you, but you're pushing me away." He turned away, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get it, Mom. You never do." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "What is it that I don't get? Talk to me, please." He spun around, eyes blazing with something I couldn't quite identify. Anger, frustration, or maybe something deeper. "You think I want this? You think I want to feel like this?" The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. "Derek, I just want to help you. I love you. Please let me in," I pleaded, my heart racing. A heavy silence fell between us, the weight of our words hanging in the air. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the turmoil he was grappling with. But just as quickly as it had come, the moment evaporated, replaced by a cold indifference. "Whatever, Mom. I don't need your help." He turned away from me, retreating to his room, leaving me standing there, heartbroken and bewildered. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Derek, his struggles, his pain, and the distance growing between us. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but how could I when he wouldn't let me in? The clock ticked ominously in the silence, and as I drifted into a restless sleep, I had no idea that the night would take a turn I could never have imagined. The morning air was thick with an unsettling stillness as I stepped outside, the sun climbing slowly over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the quiet streets of Farmingdale. But today, there was an undercurrent of tension that felt foreign to our idyllic suburb. I had barely closed the door behind me when I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, standing on her porch, her face ashen, eyes wide with disbelief. "Have you seen Patricia?" she called out, her voice shaky. I shook my head, my stomach clenching. "No, I thought she was just busy preparing for Halloween. Why?" Her lips quivered. I think something's wrong. The police are here." "Police?" The word sent a chill down my spine. I had always thought of our neighborhood as a safe haven, a place where children played in the streets and neighbors exchanged pleasantries. I hurried across the lawn, my heart racing, dread pooling in my chest. As I approached the ward residence, I could see the flashing lights of police cars reflecting against the trees. Officers were milling about, their expressions grave. I caught sight of Officer Reynolds, a familiar face in our community. He looked up as I approached, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ma'am, you need to step back," he said, holding up a hand. "There's been an incident." An incident? What kind of incident? Panic clawed at me. I had known Patricia for years. She was a kind, dedicated professor, always willing to help her students. "Just, please give us some space," he insisted, his tone firm but not unkind. I watched as more officers arrived, their movements brisk and purposeful. A knot formed in my throat as I turned to Mrs. Henderson, whose eyes were glued to the door of the ward home. The front porch was cluttered with Halloween decorations, a stark contrast to the horror that was unfolding inside. "What do you think happened?" I whispered, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling, "but I overheard them talking about a body." My breath hitched. "A body? You can't mean Patricia." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted as an officer shouted for someone to call in a forensic team. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had to know. I had to see for myself. I edged closer, straining to hear snippets of conversation. "Definitely a homicide. No signs of forced entry. We need to find Derek." A chill swept through me at the mention of Derek's name. He had always been a troubled boy, his behavior increasingly erratic over the past few months. I remembered the countless times Patricia had confided in me about her struggles with him, her voice heavy with worry. What if he did something to her? I murmured, the thought sending a wave of nausea through me. "I can't believe this is happening," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes darting around as if searching for answers in the chaos. "It's like a nightmare." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the house, a uniformed officer leading the way. My heart sank as I saw the expression on his face, grim and resigned. He turned to the gathered crowd, his voice steady, yet somber. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we have found Patricia Ward deceased. We are currently searching for her son, Derek Ward, who is considered a person of interest in this case. If anyone has seen him, please contact the police immediately." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd, the shock palpable. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The reality of the situation was too much to bear. It felt surreal, like a scene from a horror movie. I glanced at Mrs. Henderson, her face pale as she processed the news. "Derek, he wouldn't," she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. I wanted to believe that too, but the whispers of doubt crept in. Derek had been spiraling for a while, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened within those walls. The neighborhood that had once felt so safe now seemed cloaked in a sinister shadow. As the police began cordoning off the area, I stood frozen in place, grappling with the horror of it all. The reality was sinking in slowly, like a dark tide creeping over the shores of our community. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wound that would take years to heal, if it ever did. And as I looked around at my neighbors, their faces mirroring my own confusion and fear, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I wandered aimlessly along the train tracks, the metal ties cool beneath my fingers as my mind raced. The air felt thick, suffocating almost, as the weight of the world pressed down on my shoulders. I could still hear the echoes of that fateful night, the harsh words exchanged in a desperate attempt to communicate, the love buried beneath layers of anger and frustration. It was all a blur now, like a bad dream I couldn't shake off. "Derek!" I could hear my mother's voice calling out to me, filled with concern and worry. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the memories. "Please, let's talk about this." But every time she tried to reach out, I felt the walls closing in. The pressure was unbearable. "Why didn't you listen to me?" I mumbled to myself, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you just understand?" I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become a burden, a puzzle she could never quite solve. The guilt gnawed at me, a relentless beast. What had I done? As I trudged along the tracks, I noticed the leaves turning golden and red, a beautiful sight marred by the chaos swirling in my mind. The world continued to turn, indifferent to my pain. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, wishing it could shield me from the chill that seeped into my bones, both from the autumn air and the dread that gripped my heart. I stumbled upon an old bench, its wood splintered and worn, a remnant of countless moments shared by others. Sitting down, I buried my face in my hands, feeling the weight of my thoughts crashing down around me. "What have I become?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "I'm just lost." Flashes of my childhood flickered through my mind, my mother's laughter, my father's absence, the moments of joy overshadowed by a creeping darkness. I remembered the times I had tried to reach out for help, only to be met with empty assurances and dismissive glances. "He's just a troubled kid," they'd say, shrugging off my torment like it was an inconvenience. "Derek!" The voice echoed again, this time clearer, as if it were a figment of my imagination or a cruel joke. I could picture her standing there, worry etched across her face. "You need help. Please listen to me." But how could I explain the turmoil inside me? How could I convey the monstrous thoughts that haunted my every waking hour? "Help?" I scoffed, throwing my head back against the bench. What kind of help? I had seen therapists and taken medications that only dulled the pain without ever addressing the root of it. Each time I felt more disconnected from who I was. Suddenly, a sound broke through my haze, a distant train horn blaring, piercing the silence. My heart raced as I turned to face the tracks. The rumble of the approaching train vibrated through my chest. For a moment, an unsettling calm washed over me. What if I just stepped forward? Would it all end? Would the pain fade away? "Derek!" The voice was getting louder now, and I recognized it as the frantic calls of the search party. My heart sank. They were coming for me, a reminder of my failures. "You don't understand," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You don't know what it's like to fight these demons every single day." I stood up, swaying slightly as the train drew closer. I could feel the vibrations in my bones, the roar of metal against metal filling my ears. I closed my eyes, letting the wind rush past me, carrying away my thoughts. In my mind, I heard my mother's voice again, softer this time. "I love you, Derek. I'm here." The warmth of those words wrapped around me, but I felt so far removed from that love. "Why couldn't I be the son you needed?" I cried out, my voice swallowed by the sound of the approaching train. "Derek, please!" The desperation in her voice pierced through my haze, an anchor holding me back from the edge. I took a deep breath, the chill of reality crashing down on me, forcing me to confront the truth. I had a choice to make. Would I succumb to the darkness, or would I fight for the light I once knew? I stood by the train tracks, the cold wind biting at my skin, but I hardly felt it. The crushing weight of despair wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. My heart raced as I stared down the steel rails, the distant rumble of the approaching train becoming a haunting soundtrack to my chaotic thoughts. I could hear the faint sounds of sirens in the distance, but they felt like echoes from a different world, one I no longer belonged to. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy with guilt and regret. It was a futile gesture, talking to someone who would never respond again. My mind flashed back to the last moments we shared, the argument that spiraled out of control. I could still hear her voice, filled with disappointment and fear. I had tried to explain my pain, but the words never came out right. Suddenly, I felt the ground tremble beneath me, signaling the train's approach. I took a step closer to the edge of the tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. Memories flooded my mind, my childhood, the laughter, the love. But those memories were tainted, overshadowed by the darkness that had engulfed me in recent years. I thought of the countless nights I'd spent lying awake, haunted by voices that told me I was worthless, that I would never escape the spiral of despair. Why couldn't I just be normal? I shouted into the void, my voice swallowed by the relentless wind. Why did it have to end like this? Panic surged through me, the realization that I was utterly alone, crashing down like a tidal wave. I had tried to reach out for help, but each time I was met with indifference or misunderstanding. It felt like the world had turned its back on me, and in that moment, I understood the depths of my isolation. As the train drew nearer, I saw the bright lights piercing through the darkness, illuminating the tracks ahead. They danced in my vision like fireflies, beckoning me closer, promising an escape from the pain that had become my constant companion. I closed my eyes, the roar of the train growing louder, drowning out all rational thought. "Derek!" a voice called from behind me. I turned to see a figure running towards me, urgency etched across their face. It was Officer Jenkins, a familiar presence from the community, someone who had tried to help me in the past. "Stop! Don't do this!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the haze of my despair. "Why should I?" I yelled back, my voice laced with anger and sorrow. "What's left for me? I'm a monster. I killed her. I can't live with that." "Derek, listen to me," Jenkins pleaded, his eyes wide with fear. "You're not a monster, you're sick, and that's not your fault. We can help you. Please, just step back." But the train was so close now, its horn blaring, drowning out the sound of my racing thoughts. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, a clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. I could finally put an end to the chaos, to the pain that had been my constant companion. "Mom wouldn't want this," I murmured, tears streaming down my face. But the voices in my head screamed louder, drowning out any rational thought. "I can't do this anymore." With a final, heart-wrenching scream, I stepped forward, feeling the rush of wind as the train thundered toward me. In that fleeting moment, I felt a sense of freedom, a release from the bondage of my own mind. The world around me blurred as darkness encroached, and I surrendered to the inevitable. In the aftermath, chaos erupted. The shrill sound of sirens filled the air, and the community, already shattered by the events of the past days, would now face another wave of horror. News crews descended upon Farmingdale, their cameras capturing the grief and confusion that enveloped the town. I had become a tragic story, a cautionary tale of mental illness gone unchecked and the consequences of a system that had failed to protect both my mother and me. As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting an eerie glow on the tracks, I could only hope that my tragic end would spark a change, that perhaps my story would not be in vain. But deep down, I feared it would only serve as another headline, lost in the frenzy of media coverage, forgotten by those who didn't truly understand the depths of despair that had consumed me. The air was thick with grief and confusion as I walked through the Farmingdale community in the aftermath of the tragedy. The vibrant fall leaves, once a picturesque backdrop, now felt like a cruel joke against the somber reality that had shattered our neighborhood. I had known Patricia Ward. She was a beacon of light in our small college, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. Now her absence loomed over us like a dark cloud. As I approached the local coffee shop, I could see a small group of Patricia's colleagues gathered, their voices a murmur of disbelief and sorrow. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart aching for the lost potential and the devastating circumstances that had unfolded. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee mingling with the heavy air of mourning. "Can you believe it?" One of her colleagues, Linda, whispered, her eyes red-rimmed. "Derek was always different, but I never thought—" Her voice trailed off, unable to articulate the horror we all felt. "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's like something out of a nightmare. How could this happen?" The group fell silent, each lost in their thoughts. I felt compelled to speak up. "What do we know about Derek's situation? I mean, there had to be signs, right? Did anyone see this coming?" Mark, another professor, shook his head. "Patricia was always trying to get him help. She talked about it often. But it was like the system failed her, failed him." As I listened, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. The whispers began to swirl around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what we had been told. I needed to know more about Patricia's efforts to help her son. "Do you think she documented anything?" I asked, the thought striking me like a bolt of lightning. Maybe she was trying to raise awareness about mental health issues. Linda nodded slowly, her expression shifting from sorrow to contemplation. "She mentioned wanting to write something. I think she was frustrated with the lack of resources. Maybe it's worth looking into." The conversation turned to the community's reaction, and I could feel the tension mounting. "Some people are calling Derek a monster," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "But he was sick. He was a victim too, in a way." Mark slammed his fist on the table, startling the others. "But he murdered her. It's hard to see him as a victim when he did something so horrific." "Maybe it's not that simple," I countered, my voice rising. "Mental illness isn't black and white. We have to consider the failures of the system that left him so vulnerable. Patricia tried to help him, and look where it got her." The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could sense the shift in perspective, the dawning realization that this tragedy was not just about the act itself, but the circumstances that led to it. Maybe we should do something, Linda suggested, her voice trembling with determination. We could start a discussion group or a seminar to raise awareness about mental health in our community. Patricia would have wanted that. I felt a flicker of hope. Yes, we can honor her memory by advocating for change. If we can prevent this from happening again, maybe it'll give her death some meaning. As we started to brainstorm ideas, I couldn't shake the feeling that our conversation was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed to dig deeper into Patricia's life and what led her to the point of desperation. What had she uncovered about Derek's treatment? What secrets lay buried in their family history? Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of the lamp casting shadows across the pages of my notebook. I began to jot down questions, things I needed to investigate. Who were the mental health professionals involved in Derek's care? What had Patricia tried to expose? The more I wrote, the more I realized that this was not just about one family's tragedy. It was about an entire community's struggle with understanding and addressing mental health. I needed to find the truth for Patricia, for Derek, and for all of us. The quest for answers had begun, and I was determined to uncover the layers of this dark story that had turned our lives upside down. As I stepped into the dimly lit office of the local mental health authority, an unsettling tension filled the air. The walls were adorned with certificates and accolades, but they felt more like a facade than a testament to genuine care. My heart raced as I approached the desk of Dr. Simmons, the head psychiatrist, who was seated behind a mountain of paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, but quickly settled back into a calm mask. "Detective Morgan," he greeted, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. "What brings you here today?" I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms defiantly. "I want to talk about Derek Ward." His mother, Patricia, documented his struggles extensively. "I believe you might have some insights into their situation." Dr. Simmons shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the desk. Derek was a complicated case, to say the least. We had been monitoring him for years, but the system, it isn't perfect. "Isn't perfect?" I echoed, my tone sharp. "He was in crisis, and you failed to act. Patricia's death isn't just a tragedy. It's a result of negligence." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, we can't save everyone. Mental health is a tricky landscape. Sometimes the patients don't want help, and we can only do so much. Let's not pretend here. Patricia was trying to get help for her son. She was documenting everything, her fears, her pleas for assistance. You must have seen those files." Dr. Simmons hesitated, glancing around the office as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Yes, I was aware of her documentation. But the reality is, it's not just one person's fault. There are systemic issues at play here." "Systemic issues?" I scoffed, frustration boiling within me. "That sounds like a convenient excuse. You're telling me that a well-respected professor's life was lost because of a broken system?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Detective, you don't understand the pressure we're under. The funding cuts, the lack of resources. We're overworked and understaffed. Sometimes we have to prioritize who gets help." "Prioritize?" I spat, my anger palpable. "What about the people who fall through the cracks? What about Derek?" Before he could respond, I pulled out a folder filled with Patricia's notes. "Look at these," I urged, spreading the documents across the desk. She detailed her son's behavior, his outbursts, and her desperate attempts to reach out for help. She was trying to expose the failures of this system before it was too late. Dr. Simmons's eyes widened as he scanned the pages, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. I didn't know she had gathered this much information. "It's alarming." "Alarming?" I said incredulously. "This is beyond alarming. This is a cautionary tale that you and your colleagues need to take seriously. We can't let her death be in vain." He looked away, his expression shifting from defensiveness to something resembling guilt. "What do you want me to do, Detective? We can't change the past." "No, but we can change the future," I insisted. "The community needs to know the truth. They deserve to understand the realities of mental illness, the negligence that allowed this to happen. We need to push for reform, for better funding, for accountability. Dr. Simmons leaned back in his chair, the weight of my words settling heavily between us. You're asking for a lot, and the system isn't built for that kind of change. It's a long, uphill battle. Then let's start the fight today, I said firmly. Patricia's story needs to be heard. We owe it to her and to Derek. It's time to shed light on these dark corners. A long silence stretched between us, the gravity of our conversation hanging in the air. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right. I'll look into this. I'll see what can be done. As I left the office, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. I was stepping into a fight against a convoluted system, but I knew that the struggle was worth it. I could already envision the community coming together, rallying for change. But the haunting reality of what had happened still lingered. The scars of mental illness were deep, and the consequences of inaction echoed through every corner of Farmingdale. Story 2. The night air was crisp as I adjusted the black witch's hat perched atop my head, the fabric brushing against my face. Halloween had always been my favorite holiday, filled with magic and mischief. Megan, hurry up. We're going to miss all the good candy, Emily called out, her voice bubbling with excitement. She was dressed as a fairy, complete with shimmering wings that fluttered as she hopped from foot to foot. Just a sec. I can't find my broomstick, I shouted back, rifling through the pile of costumes spread across my bedroom floor. Sarah, dressed as a vampire, rolled her eyes and grinned. You know you can't fly without it, right? Very funny, Sarah, I shot back, finally locating the broomstick wedged under my bed. I grabbed it triumphantly, and we all burst into laughter, the kind that bubbled up from deep within, full of youthful exuberance. The air was electric with possibility as we stepped outside into the moonlit night. As we wandered through the neighborhood, our laughter echoed against the backdrop of rustling leaves and distant fireworks. The streets were alive with children decked out in costumes, canvassing for candy. We made our way to the park, a well-known hotspot for trick-or-treating, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Not from the chill in the air, but from the thrill of adventure. Let's take a shortcut through the park, Emily suggested, her eyes sparkling. We can hit the houses on the other side faster. Are you sure? It's kind of dark in there, I replied, glancing at the dense shadows that loomed ahead. Oh, come on. What's Halloween without a little spook? Sarah chimed in, her enthusiasm contagious. I exchanged a glance with Emily, and after a moment's hesitation, we nodded in agreement. As we stepped into the park, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by an eerie silence that wrapped around us like a thick fog. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy of trees, casting long shadows that danced in the corners of my vision. This is kinda creepy, I muttered, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. Stop being such a scaredy cat, Megan, Emily teased, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, too. Just then, a rustle in the bushes caught our attention. We froze, hearts racing, as a figure emerged from the shadows. My stomach dropped as I realized it was a man, his face obscured by a mask. What do we have here? He asked, brandishing something that glinted menacingly in the dim light. Is that a gun? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Run! I screamed, but before we could react, he lunged at us. A sense of panic surged through me, and I turned to sprint, but he was faster. He grabbed my wrist, yanking me backward as Emily and Sarah screamed. Please let us go, I begged, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's grip was like iron, and I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Shut up, he barked, brandishing the fake gun. You're coming with me. As he dragged us down a steep embankment, I could hear the distant sounds of laughter and celebration from the neighborhood Halloween party. It felt surreal, like we were being pulled into a nightmare. In a moment of desperation, I fumbled for my phone, hoping against hope that I could send a text for help. My fingers trembled as I typed out a frantic message. Help! We're in the park, kidnapped. Are you texting someone? The man snarled, and before I could react, he snatched my phone from my hands and tossed it into the darkness. I could feel the weight of despair crashing down on me. Please, just let us go, I pleaded, my voice cracking. Too late for that, he sneered, dragging us further into the shadows. The laughter from the party faded, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat, each thud a reminder of the gravity of our situation. I glanced at Emily and Sarah, their faces pale with fear, and in that moment, I knew we had to fight. Together. I remember the chilling air of that Halloween night as if it were yesterday. The excitement coursing through our veins was palpable, but that thrill quickly morphed into a dread I had never known. As we huddled together in the dimly lit park, sharing whispers of our costumes and giggling about the candy we hoped to collect, the night took a sinister turn. "Megan, look over there!" Emily's voice trembled as she pointed towards a shadowy figure emerging from the trees. My heart raced, and I instinctively clutched Sarah's arm. "It's probably just someone else out trick-or-treating," I said, trying to suppress the growing unease. But as the figure stepped closer, my bravado faltered. The moment he revealed the fake gun, an icy chill gripped my entire body. It felt surreal, like a scene from a horror movie, and yet it was all too real. "Get down the embankment now," Aaron Thomas barked, his voice a guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. "Please don't hurt us," Sarah cried, her face pale with fear. I could see the terror reflected in her eyes, and I felt my own panic rising. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, hoping against hope that I could send a message before it was too late. "Stay close together," Emily urged as we stumbled down the steep slope, our laughter from earlier now a distant memory. Every step felt like a descent into darkness, a nightmare from which we couldn't awaken. Just as we reached the bottom, I managed to send a quick text to my dad. "Help! We're in the park!" My heart raced as I hit send, praying that it would reach him in time. I could already hear muffled cries echoing in the distance, and I knew we had to keep moving. Aaron's grip tightened around my shoulder as he shoved me forward. "Keep walking and don't look back." His breath was hot against my neck, and I fought the urge to scream. Instead, I stole a glance at Emily and Sarah, their faces etched with fear. "We'll be okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The darkness of the woods enveloped us, and I could hear the rustle of leaves beneath our feet. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but every instinct screamed at me to obey. A part of me wondered how long it would take for someone to notice we were missing, how long before help arrived. In the midst of our harrowing trek, the faint sound of sirens pierced the air and hope flickered within me. "Do you hear that?" I breathed, my heart quickening at the thought that someone might be searching for us. But Aaron's face twisted with anger. "Shut up!" he growled, pushing me forward again. I stumbled, nearly falling to the ground, but Sarah caught me. "We can't give up," she whispered fiercely, her eyes sparkling with determination. Suddenly, the sounds of the police grew louder, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "They're coming!" I shouted, my voice rising above the rustling trees. "We have to get to them." Just then, Aaron froze, his eyes darting around nervously. "We need to move, now!" He started to pull us deeper into the woods, but his grip felt weaker, like a wolf cornered. Before I could comprehend what was happening, headlights pierced the darkness, and the police arrived. "This way! We can see you!" an officer shouted, his voice cutting through the fear like a knife. In a moment of panic, Aaron turned to run, and adrenaline surged through me. "Help! Over here!" I screamed, knowing this was our chance. Emily and Sarah joined me, our voices blending as we cried out for assistance, our hearts racing with a mix of fear and hope. The officers heard us and bolted toward our direction. But in the chaos, Aaron slipped through their grasp. My heart sank as I watched him disappear into the shadows, leaving us trembling and vulnerable. "Are you girls okay?" one of the officers asked, concern etched on his face as he knelt beside us. I could only nod, tears streaming down my cheeks as the reality of our ordeal began to sink in. "Let's get you to safety," he said, offering his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his reassurance, but the fear still clung to me like a shadow. We were alive, but the nightmares had only just begun. The days following our harrowing experience felt surreal. I remember sitting in my room, the remnants of Halloween still scattered around, half-eaten candy, a tattered ghost decoration that had seen better days. I should have been out at parties, enjoying the usual festivities with friends. Instead, I was trapped in a nightmare replaying in my mind. "Are you okay?" Emily asked softly one afternoon when we met at the small cafe down the street. Her eyes were puffy, betraying the sleepless nights we'd all endured since that fateful night. I could see the tremors in her hands as she cradled a warm cup of tea, the steam curling up toward her face. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what happened," I admitted, squeezing my own cup as if it could somehow ground me. It feels like I can't escape it. Emily nodded, her gaze drifting out the window, where autumn leaves danced in the wind. I thought maybe talking to someone would help. I've been going to therapy, and it's weird, but sometimes it feels good to let it all out. Yeah? I asked, intrigued but also hesitant. The idea of sharing my trauma with a stranger felt daunting. What's it like? It's tough at first. You sit there and just stare at the wall, but then they ask you questions, and you start to talk. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, you know? It hurts, but you can breathe a little easier once you get to the core. I sighed, contemplating her words. Maybe I should try. I don't want to relive it. Neither do I. But it's better than keeping it bottled up, she replied, her voice calming. We can go together if you want. I've got another session next week. Okay, I said, the promise of companionship making the idea less terrifying. We can do this together. The following week, we sat in the waiting room of the therapist's office, the muted colors and soft lighting doing little to ease the weight in my chest. I'm actually nervous, I confessed, biting my lip. Me too, Emily admitted, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. But we're here. That's what matters. The session felt like a whirlwind. Dr. Patel was kind and patient, guiding us through our thoughts and feelings. I found myself speaking about the fear that gripped me, the shadows that seemed to loom larger than life. I feel like I'm always looking over my shoulder, I said, my voice trembling. Like he could just pop up again at any moment. That's completely understandable given what you've been through, Dr. Patel reassured me. It's a part of the healing process to acknowledge that fear, but it's also important to find ways to reclaim your life. As the weeks turned into months, the therapy sessions became a lifeline. Emily and I would often meet afterward to grab ice cream or just sit in the park sharing a comfortable silence. But the world outside was not so forgiving. The media was relentless, sensationalizing our story, painting us as victims but also as survivors, symbols of resilience. One evening, while scrolling through the news, I stumbled upon a familiar name, Aaron Thomas. The headline read, "East Coast Rapist, the Hunt Continues." My heart raced as I read through the report, detailing the string of unsolved crimes and the terror that hung over our community. Can you believe this? I turned to Emily, who was sitting beside me on the couch. They're still talking about him, like he's some kind of ghost. I know, she replied, staring intently at her phone. It's like he's become this infamous figure, and we're stuck in the middle of it. Do you think they'll ever catch him? I asked, the fear bubbling back up again. They have to, she said, determination sparking in her eyes. He can't just keep getting away with it. Not after what he did to us. I nodded, but a part of me felt helpless. It was as if he had woven himself into the fabric of our lives, a dark thread that refused to be cut. With every news report, every mention of his name, I felt the shadows creeping back in, reminding me of our encounter in the park that Halloween night. As I sat there, pen in hand, I began to jot down my thoughts, capturing the feelings that seemed to spiral around me. Journaling became my way of processing the storm inside. Dear Diary, I wrote, the world feels heavy tonight, and I'm not sure how to lift it. Little did I know, those words would lead me to uncover patterns in the reports, hints that could connect the dots of a much larger picture. The realization that I might hold the key to understanding his actions set my heart racing. I was no longer just a victim. I could be an active participant in uncovering the truth. I can still feel the chill of that Halloween night, how the air was thick with the smell of fallen leaves and the distant sound of laughter and excitement. Years have passed since that fateful evening when Aaron Thomas shattered our innocence, but time has done little to erase the scars. Now, as I look around the room at our annual Halloween gathering, I see familiar faces, friends who once masked their fears in laughter, just like we did. Is it weird that I still can't stand pumpkin spice? Emily jokes, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she hands me a cup of steaming cider. I can't help but chuckle, the tension easing slightly. I don't think it's weird at all. I'd rather stick with plain old apple cider. Ugh, you're such a basic white girl, Megan, Sarah teases, rolling her eyes but smiling affectionately. I can't help but feel grateful for moments like this, where laughter drowns out the echoes of the past, even if just for a little while. As we settle into the cozy living room, decorated with cobwebs and jack-o'-lanterns, the atmosphere seems to buzz with a mix of nostalgia and trepidation. The three of us have spent countless hours discussing our shared trauma, but tonight feels different. There's a weight in the air that I can't shake. "Do you think he's still out there?" Emily's voice cuts through my thoughts, her expression turning serious. The question hangs between us, heavy and oppressive. I can see the flicker of fear in her eyes, a reflection of my own. Honestly, I have no idea, I admit, my voice barely above a whisper. But the police are doing their best. They're working on those cold cases. We just have to trust the process. Trust the process? Sarah scoffs, crossing her arms. That's easier said than done. We know he's out there. Every time I hear a siren, my heart drops. Me too, I say, glancing at the window where the night is draped in darkness. But we're alive, and we need to focus on that. We're not just survivors. We're fighters. For a moment, silence envelops us, and I can feel the unspoken understanding passing between us. We've each found ways to cope, but the lingering trauma can't be ignored. I reach for my journal, the one filled with my thoughts, fears, and the patterns I've noticed in the news reports over the years. Maybe we should do something, I suggest, flipping through the pages filled with my messy handwriting. We can help others who have gone through similar horrors. There are so many victims out there who need to know they're not alone. Emily and Sarah exchange glances, the spark of an idea igniting between us. Like a support group? Emily asks, her brow furrowing as she considers it. Exactly. We could host it here, invite people to share their stories. We could use the community center, get some local therapists involved. Each word flows more easily than the last, fueling my passion. We could even organize a fundraiser to support survivors. It's time we take back our power. I like it. Sarah nods, enthusiasm creeping into her voice. We could even have a Halloween theme. It could be cathartic. The idea hangs in the air, vibrant and alive. I can see it in my mind. The three of us standing together, encouraging others to speak out, to heal. As the night wears on, we share stories and laughter. But the thought of our plan lingers in the background. I catch a glimpse of the clock ticking on the wall, a reminder that time waits for no one. Outside, the wind howls, a stark contrast to the warmth of our gathering. Hey, let's make a vow, I propose, raising my cup in a toast. No matter what happens, we support each other. We won't let fear dictate our lives. To us and to moving forward, Emily adds, lifting her cup with conviction. To us, Sarah echoes, her voice steady. With that, we clink our cups together, a small but significant gesture of unity against the shadows that threaten to linger. As the night unfolds, I can't shake the feeling that something is brewing beneath the surface, a reminder that even in our moments of joy, the past has a way of creeping back in. And somewhere out there, I can't help but wonder if Aaron Thomas is watching, waiting. As I stepped onto the stage at the community event, a wave of nerves washed over me. The bright lights blinded me momentarily, and I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me waiting for me to speak. Emily and Sarah stood off to the side, their encouraging smiles giving me a flicker of strength. This was our moment to share our story and, hopefully, to spark change. I took a deep breath and adjusted the microphone. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan, I began, my voice shaking slightly. I want to share something very personal with you all today. The audience quieted, and I could hear the faint rustle of programs being shuffled. On Halloween night in 2009, my friends and I were kidnapped by a man who would go on to terrorize many families along the East Coast. We thought it was just another night of trick-or-treating. We had no idea. I paused, my throat tightening. We had no idea what lay ahead. As I spoke, I could see the faces in the crowd shift. Some were sympathetic, others curious, and a few looked horrified. I pressed on, recounting the fear, the darkness, and the moments when hope flickered like a dying candle. We were lucky to escape, but not everyone is. Many survivors don't have a voice, and that's why we're here today. Emily stepped forward, her eyes bright with determination. We're here to raise awareness and to support those who faced similar horrors. We want to remind everyone that they are not alone. I felt a swell of pride looking at my friends, the girls who had endured the same nightmare, who stood by me as we faced the haunting memories together. Sarah joined in, her voice steady. Every story matters, and every survivor deserves justice. We need to push for those cold cases to ensure they are not forgotten. The energy in the room shifted, almost electric. People were nodding, whispering to each other. I could feel the momentum building, and it fueled my passion. Together, we can make a difference. We can compel law enforcement to take these cases seriously. We can push for more resources, more training, and more support. After our speech, the crowd erupted into applause. It was overwhelming, the sound washing over me like a warm blanket. The three of us hugged tightly, feeling an unspoken bond that no trauma could ever sever. "We did it," Emily whispered, her eyes glistening. But as the event continued, the atmosphere shifted. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I stepped aside to check the message. My heart sank as I read the words, "Aaron has resurfaced." I felt the world tilt beneath me, the applause fading into a dull roar. "Megan?" Sarah's voice broke through my fog. "What is it?" I turned to face them, my body trembling. It's Aaron. He's back." Emily's face paled, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. "How do they know?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "I don't know. It just says he's been spotted in town, that he's linked to a recent attack." "No," Sarah whispered. "Not again. We can't go through this again." "We won't go through this alone," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "We'll fight back, together. We've come too far to let him take our power again." The resolve in my heart began to harden. I looked into my friends' eyes, and I could see the fire igniting within them as well. "We have to alert the police. They need to know he's back." As we made our way back to the crowd, the weight of our shared history pressed against us. There was a newfound urgency in the air, and I could sense the shift. We were not just survivors. We were warriors now, ready to confront the shadows of our past and ensure that no one else would have to face what we endured alone. Our voices, once trembling with fear, now rang with determination. Together we would ignite a movement, and this time we wouldn't back down. The atmosphere was thick with tension as I stood in the dimly lit room of the police station, surrounded by Megan and Emily. We had just been informed about a breakthrough in the investigation. A hidden stash of evidence had been discovered in Aaron's old hideout. My heart raced at the thought of finally confronting the monster who had terrorized us. But even amidst the flicker of hope, a shadow loomed large. Sarah was missing. "Where is she?" I whispered, my voice barely breaking the silence. Megan's eyes were wide, filled with the same panic I felt clawing at my insides. "I don't know," Megan replied, her voice trembling. "She was supposed to meet us here." Emily, her face pale, glanced toward the door as if she could will Sarah to walk through it. "We need to find her. We can't let Aaron win again." The urgency in her voice ignited a fire within me. "We'll search for her. We have to." As we hurried out of the station, the weight of our past clung to us like a wet blanket. The streets were eerily quiet, the chill of the autumn air biting at our skin. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves underfoot, a reminder of the night that had changed our lives forever. "Let's check her apartment first," I suggested, trying to keep my thoughts focused. Maybe she just lost track of time. The three of us piled into my car, the engine humming softly as if it, too, was anxious. The drive felt agonizingly long, each second stretching into eternity. I glanced at Megan and Emily, both lost in their thoughts, their faces etched with worry. "Do you think it's related?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. "What do you mean?" I replied, my brow furrowed. "Sarah disappearing, after everything we've been through. It's too coincidental." Megan shook her head, her expression fierce. "No, we can't think like that. We have to believe she's okay." As we arrived at Sarah's apartment, my heart sank. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. "This isn't good," I muttered, stepping cautiously inside. The living room was in disarray. Cushions were thrown about, and a lamp lay shattered on the floor. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. "Maybe she's just out for a walk or something." Emily tried to reassure us, but deep down I could feel the dread coiling tighter. We searched every room, but there was no sign of her. Just when I felt the panic reaching its peak, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from a local news outlet. I clicked it open, and my heart dropped. "Guys, look!" I exclaimed, showing them the screen. A surveillance photo had been released, depicting Sarah walking down a street not far from her apartment, but there was something off. A figure loomed in the background, obscured but unmistakably there. "That's him," Megan breathed, her face paling. "How did he find her?" Emily whispered, clutching my arm tightly. The implications washed over us like a cold wave. "We need to get to the police, now," I urged, my mind racing. As we rushed back, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What if Aaron had returned? What if he had taken Sarah? When we reached the station, the officers were already buzzing with activity, the atmosphere electric with urgency. "We have a lead," I shouted, pushing through the crowd. A detective turned to us, his expression serious. "What did you find?" I showed him the photo, my hands trembling. "This was taken near Sarah's apartment. We think she's in danger." He studied the image, then nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "We'll get a team out there. We won't let him take anyone else." As we waited for updates, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were no longer just victims. We were fighters. Hours passed, each minute dragging painfully. My mind raced with thoughts of Sarah. Where could she be? What was happening to her? Finally, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. An officer rushed in, breathless. "We found her!" A collective gasp filled the room, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Where is she?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "She's safe, but there's more to this than we thought. We need you girls to come with us." I exchanged worried glances with Megan and Emily. "What do you mean?" "There's a connection between Sarah's disappearance and a larger criminal network we've been investigating. We believe Aaron isn't working alone." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. The darkness of our past was deeper than we had imagined, and this was just the beginning. As we followed the officer, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. We had already battled the darkness once. This time, we would shine a light on it. Story 3. I could feel the excitement buzzing in the air as I made my way home from church on Halloween night. The streetlights flickered above me, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. Kids in costumes darted past, their laughter echoing in the cool evening air, but all I could think about was the fun that awaited me at home. My little brother, Ethan, was probably bouncing off the walls with Halloween candy in anticipation. "Devin, wait up!" I turned to see my best friend, Mark, running to catch up with me. He was dressed as a vampire, complete with fake fangs and a cape that billowed behind him. "Hey Mark, ready to hit up the haunted house later?" I asked, grinning at him. "Totally. I heard it's the scariest one yet. I'm not sure I'll survive," he joked, pretending to shiver. We walked together, the familiar path to my house lined with pumpkins and decorations that screamed Halloween spirit. The thrill of the night was palpable and I felt invincible until I reached my front door. I opened it, expecting the usual warmth of home, but was greeted by an unsettling silence. I called out, "Mom? Ethan? Dad?" The only response was the echo of my voice bouncing off the walls. As I stepped inside, a chill crept up my spine. The house felt different, almost foreign in the dim light. My heart raced as I moved deeper into the living room, where I could have sworn I saw the flicker of a candle. But the room was dark and the flicker was gone. "Hello?" I called again, my voice wavering. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But curiosity pushed me forward. I made my way down the hallway, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. Each step felt heavy, as if the air was thickening around me. I paused outside the kitchen and took a deep breath, peering around the corner. That's when I saw it. The sight was so horrific that my brain struggled to comprehend it. My mother lay sprawled on the floor, her eyes wide and lifeless. Next to her, Ethan's small body was curled up, a crimson pool surrounding him. My stepdad, Mark, was slumped against the counter, his face frozen in shock. "No, no, no," I whispered, my voice barely coming out as a croak. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, my heart racing with disbelief. This couldn't be real. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. In a daze, I backed away until I collided with the wall. My mind was racing, searching for answers, searching for hope. "This isn't happening," I muttered, shaking my head as if that could erase the horror before me. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a soft shuffling from the living room. My heart stopped. Was there someone else in the house? I felt frozen, rooted to the spot. My instinct told me to run, to escape, but my feet wouldn't move. "Devon?" A voice called out, shaky and hesitant. It was William, my half-brother. "Is that you?" I felt a jolt of fear at the sound of his voice. William had always been troubled, and the thought of him being involved in this nightmare sent a wave of nausea through me. "William!" I shouted, my voice rising in panic. "What happened? Where's everyone?" He appeared in the doorway, his eyes wild, a sheen of sweat on his brow. I didn't mean to. It just happened." He stumbled forward, hands shaking. "Did you do this?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I didn't want to. They were going to hurt us." He paused, looking into the distance as if reliving a moment that had shattered his mind. "William, what are you talking about?" I stepped back, my heart racing as I tried to process the chaos unraveling before me. In that moment, everything shifted. The excitement of Halloween, the laughter of children, the warmth of home, it all faded into a dark abyss. My life had irrevocably changed, and I was left standing at its edge, staring into the unknown. The days following the horrific events felt like a surreal nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. Martin, a town once full of laughter and life, was now cloaked in an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the murmurs of neighbors gathered outside their homes, eyes wide with disbelief. I could see them through my window, their faces pale and drawn, as if they were ghosts haunting the very streets we used to walk together. I wanted to join them, to share in their grief, but I felt like an outsider in my own life. "Devon, are you okay?" my best friend Jake asked hesitantly, standing at the front door. His voice cut through the fog of my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. "Yeah," I managed to reply, though it felt like a lie. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I wasn't okay, that I would never be okay again. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I forced a smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked, his gaze darting around as if he feared what he might find inside. "Sure." I stepped aside, letting him in. The house was filled with an eerie stillness, the remnants of a life that had been shattered. The air was heavy with unspoken words, memories that echoed in the silence. As Jake crossed the threshold, he hesitated, taking in the darkened living room, the untouched decorations from Halloween now a grim reminder of what had happened. "I can't believe they're gone," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. I nodded, feeling the weight of my grief pressing down on me. "I keep thinking, maybe it's all just a bad dream." "It's not," Jake said softly, his eyes filled with sympathy. "You need to talk about it." "Talk about what? How my family was brutally murdered? How my own brother, did it?" My voice broke, and I felt the tears threatening to spill over. I quickly wiped my eyes, not wanting him to see me break down. "I don't know, man. Maybe about the good times? Your mom, she was always so warm and welcoming. Remember those Halloween parties she used to throw?" A flicker of warmth ignited in my chest, and I allowed myself to reminisce. "Yeah. She'd spend weeks preparing, making sure everything was perfect. The costumes, the decorations." I chuckled bitterly. "She even made that terrible punch that everyone pretended to love." Jake managed a small smile. "And your little brother would always win the costume contest without fail, the way he'd strut around in his superhero outfit, like he owned the place." "Yeah, he was something else," I said, my heart aching at the memory. But then the darkness crept back in. And now they're gone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I could see Jake searching for the right words, but there were none. "Devon," he finally said, "I know this is hard, but you need to think about what happened. The police will want to talk to you, and you'll need to tell them everything you remember." I swallowed hard, the reality of that statement settling in. What if I can't remember? What if I don't want to remember? "You have to," he insisted, his tone turning serious. "You're the only one left who can help them understand what happened. They need to know about William." The name sent a shiver down my spine. William, my half-brother, the one who had caused this unimaginable pain. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he was capable of such violence. "I don't want to think about him. I just want to forget." "Forget?" Jake echoed, disbelief coloring his voice. "You can't just forget, Devon. It doesn't work that way." "I know," I sighed, feeling the weight of my anguish. "But how can I face it? How can I face him?" "You'll have to be strong. For your family, for yourself. You owe it to them to find out why." As I looked into Jake's earnest eyes, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. Maybe I couldn't forget, but I could seek justice. I could find out the truth behind the darkness that had invaded my life. "Okay," I said slowly, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll do it. I'll talk to the police." "Good," Jake replied, relief washing over his features. "I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." In that moment, I realized that I wasn't completely alone. I had people who cared, even in the midst of my despair. I just hoped it would be enough to help me navigate the storm that lay ahead. I leaned against the cool wooden railing of the porch, staring blankly at the fading autumn leaves. The vibrant colors of the trees outside felt like a mockery of the hollow emptiness inside me. After the murders, the town of Martin had transformed into a strange mix of support and suspicion, and I often found myself caught in the crossfire of whispered rumors. They were concerned, but their eyes held a different story, a flicker of blame that no one dared to voice directly. "Devon!" My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called out, her voice laced with concern. "You shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe." I turned to face her, forcing a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson, just thinking." She approached, her brow furrowed. "You're still in shock. You need to talk to someone. Have you considered seeing a counselor? It might help." "Thanks, but I don't want to talk about it." I glanced away, the memory of that night crashing over me like a tidal wave. The blood, the silence, the faces of my family frozen in horror. How could I explain the chaos swirling in my mind? As if sensing my turmoil, she placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You're not alone, Devon. We're all here for you." "Yeah, I know," I replied. But the words felt hollow. The support felt like a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. I wished I could confide in someone, but the thought of sharing the weight of my grief felt unbearable. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows dancing as the moonlight seeped through the curtains. Memories of William crept into my mind uninvited. He was my half-brother, but we'd shared a bond that was peculiar and layered. I remembered the laughter we had shared as children, building forts out of blankets and pretending we were knights protecting our kingdom. I could still hear his voice, animated and full of life, echoing in our backyard as we played. "Come on, Devon, we're invincible," he had shouted, his eyes sparkling with mischief. But beneath those carefree moments lurked an undercurrent of tension. William was different. His moods would shift like the wind, and I often found myself walking on eggshells around him. I recalled the time he had become fixated on a horror movie, the way he stared at the screen with a mix of fascination and fear. "Why do you like it so much?" I had asked, trying to understand. "It's real, Devon. Real life is scary. We just pretend it isn't," he replied, a seriousness in his tone that unnerved me. I shook my head, trying to clear the memories, but they flooded back with relentless force. There were times when I felt a fierce loyalty towards him, wanting to protect him from the world's judgment. Yet there were also moments when his darkness seeped into our lives, leaving me feeling trapped between love and fear. "Why did you do it, William?" I whispered into the darkness as if he could somehow hear me. The next day, the community gathered at the church, the air thick with unspoken grief. I stood in the back, observing as familiar faces exchanged glances filled with pity or suspicion. Conversations buzzed around me, snippets of gossip that pierced through the heaviness of the atmosphere. "Did you hear about William's past? They say he was always trouble." "Poor Devon. I can't imagine what he's going through. But William? Who knows what he's capable of?" I felt my chest tighten at their words, a mix of anger and sadness swelling within me. I wanted to scream, to tell them that William was more than just a monster. He was my brother, and despite everything, I felt an inexplicable urge to defend him. As I stepped outside for some fresh air, my mind raced. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than anyone understood. William's struggles, his demons, they couldn't simply vanish overnight, could they? Just then, a figure approached me. It was Officer Daniels, a family friend who had been involved in the investigation. His face was etched with concern. "Devin, can we talk?" he asked gently. He asked. I nodded, my heart racing. "Is it about William?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "We're still piecing together the timeline from that night. There are gaps, things that don't add up." "What do you mean?" I pressed, feeling a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. "I can't disclose everything, but if you remember anything at all, please let me know. It could help us understand what happened." I nodded again, determination blooming within me. I had to know the truth, not just for myself, but for William too. Whatever darkness had consumed him, I was determined to uncover it, even if it meant revisiting the fragments of our shared past. The town hall meeting felt like a pressure cooker, every voice adding to the suffocating tension that filled the air. I sat in the back, my heart racing as townsfolk expressed their fears and frustrations about the Griffin family murders. The hall was packed, faces twisted in confusion and anger, and I could hardly breathe. All I wanted was to feel safe again, but the atmosphere crackled with something dark and foreboding. "Who could do such a thing?" a woman yelled from the front row, her voice quivering with rage. "First, they're saying it was William, he's just a kid. What happened to our community? What's become of us?" Another man shot back. "He's not just a kid, he's a monster. He killed them without a shred of remorse. We can't just sit here and pretend everything is fine." The crowd murmured in agreement, and I felt the weight of their eyes on me. Anger and guilt swirled within me like a storm. I didn't want to be the center of this chaos, but I was tied to it, an unwilling participant in this tragedy. I couldn't shake off the whispers that followed me everywhere, the looks of pity mixed with suspicion. "Devin," my friend Sarah whispered, leaning close, "you should say something. They need to hear from you." I shook my head, feeling a lump form in my throat. "What do I even say? I'm not even sure what I feel." She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Just be honest. They're scared. You're scared. We all are." Before I could respond, the mayor stepped up to the podium, his face pale but his voice steady. "We need to come together as a community to support one another in this dark time. We must reach out to the Liska family as well. They're suffering too, despite what William did." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. "Support them? After what happened?" "I can't believe you," a voice yelled from the back. "William is dangerous. He should be locked away forever." "Enough," the mayor shouted, his patience wearing thin. "This isn't helping anyone. We need to be united, not divided." As the meeting continued, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from my father. "I'm sorry, Devin, but I need to talk to you about William. Meet me at the station." The urgency of his message sent a chill down my spine. I excused myself from the meeting, the conversations fading into a dull roar as I stepped outside. The cool night air hit me like a wave, momentarily clearing my mind. I walked briskly toward the police station, my heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. When I arrived, my father was waiting for me, his expression grave. "Devin," he said, pulling me aside, "you need to be careful. William is in custody, but..." "But what?" I pressed, desperate to understand. "They say he's been talking about the night of the murders. You need to see him. It might help you find closure." The idea of confronting William filled me with dread. What if he tries to hurt me? What if he's not even sane? "He's locked up, Devin. You'll be safe. But I think you need to know what he has to say. You deserve answers." I hesitated, wrestling with my fear and my need for understanding. What if I can't handle it? Then we'll find a way to help you through it. But you need to do this for yourself, for your family. The conversation played in my mind as I approached the interrogation room. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I felt the cold steel of the door handle beneath my fingers. I took a deep breath and opened the door. William sat there, his face gaunt, eyes wide and darting around the room as if he were trapped in a nightmare. He looked up at me with a mixture of recognition and confusion, as if he could hardly believe I was there. "Devin?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here?" "I need to know," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "What happened that night?" He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if searching for something in my expression. You don't understand. They were coming for us. I had to protect us. Protect us? From who? I pressed, feeling a knot form in my stomach. From the voices, he murmured, almost to himself. They told me things. I had to listen. They wouldn't let me go. William, this isn't making any sense, I shot back, frustration bubbling over. What voices? What do you mean? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the brother I used to know, the one I had shared laughter with before all of this darkness consumed him. They were angry, he said, his voice trembling. I tried to make them stop, but they wouldn't. I thought I was saving you, Devon. Saving me? I echoed, my heart racing. From what? His expression shifted, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. From the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I felt my pulse quicken. What truth? What had he done? And why was I starting to feel that perhaps I didn't want to know? I sat in the quiet of my room, the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. It felt as though the darkness from that fateful Halloween night had seeped into every corner of my life. I couldn't escape the memories, the blood, the screams, the silence that followed. But it was more than just a haunting past. I needed to understand the twisted connections that had led to the horror I had witnessed. The local disappearances, which had once been mere whispers among the townsfolk, now gnawed at the back of my mind. I grabbed my notebook, the pages filled with frantic thoughts and half-formed ideas, and set out to investigate. Maybe, just maybe, there was a connection to my mother that I had overlooked. I had to know if her past held any secrets that could explain the unexplainable. As I walked through the streets of Martin, the autumn leaves crunched beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The air was cool, but I could feel a heat rising within, a determination that had been ignited by grief and confusion. I made my way to the local library, a place that had always felt like a refuge. The scent of old books wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, but the stillness of the room only served to amplify my anxiety. Devon? A voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see Ms. Hargrove, the librarian, her brow furrowed in concern. Are you all right? I heard about your family. Yeah, I'm okay, I lied, forcing a smile. I'm just looking for some information. About the disappearances? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper as if the very mention of it might summon those dark spirits. Actually, I'm looking for anything about my mom, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I need to know more about her life before everything happened. Ms. Hargrove's expression softened and she nodded, leading me to a row of bookshelves. She was a lovely woman, always so kind to everyone. Let's see what we can find. As I sifted through old newspapers and records, I stumbled upon an article that made my heart race. The headline read, "Local woman involved in controversial charity." My breath caught in my throat as I read about a charity my mother had started years ago, one that had drawn both support and criticism from the community. The details were vague, but there were mentions of missing funds and questions surrounding the organization's legitimacy. Devon, look at this, Ms. Hargrove said, pointing to an old photograph. Is that your mother? I leaned closer, squinting at the faded image. There she was, standing with several other people, all smiling. But one face stood out, a man with a shadowy smile, his eyes glinting with something sinister. My heart raced. Who was he? I've never seen him before, I murmured, trying to suppress the shiver that ran down my spine. Sometimes, people get involved with the wrong crowd, especially in charity work. It can attract all sorts of individuals, she said, her voice a mix of concern and caution. I nodded, my mind racing. What if my mother had been entangled in something much darker? What if she had been trying to protect us from forces I couldn't even begin to comprehend? The thought made my stomach churn. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows danced across my walls, and the wind howled outside like a wounded animal. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the revelations of the day. My mother's secrets were starting to surface, but they came with an unsettling weight. The following morning, I knew I had to confront William, to dig deeper into the darkness that surrounded him. Maybe he held answers that could shed light on my family's twisted legacy. As I drove to the detention center, my heart pounded in my chest. Was I ready to face the brother who had shattered my life? When I arrived, the sterile environment of the facility felt suffocating. I was led to a small, bare room, and there he was, sitting on the other side of the glass, his expression unreadable. "Devon," he said, his voice a low murmur, almost devoid of emotion. "William," I replied, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "I need to know what happened that night. I can't understand you." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't want to know, Devon. Some things are better left buried." "Better buried?" I echoed, incredulous. "You killed our family. I deserve the truth." A flicker of something crossed his face. Fear, perhaps. "You think you want the truth, but the truth will only hurt you more. There are things you don't understand, things you can't comprehend." "Then help me understand," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why did you do it? What were you involved in?" William leaned back, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "You think this is about me? This is bigger than both of us. You're just scratching the surface, little brother." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications of his words. There was a darkness that loomed over our family, and I was only beginning to uncover it. As I left the detention center, my mind swirled with questions, and I knew I had to dig deeper into my family's past. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, but at what cost? The air in the small interrogation room felt heavy, thick with questions and unspoken fears. I stood on one side of the metal table, and across from me sat William, my half-brother, his eyes darting nervously as if he were trying to escape the gravity of our shared history. The harsh fluorescent lights above buzzed, casting a cold glow over his gaunt features. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and finally broke the silence. "William," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "why did you do it? Why did you hurt Mom and Jake?" He flinched at the mention of their names, and his hands trembled slightly. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. They were in my way." "In your way?" I repeated, incredulous. "You killed them. You took them from me." The anger surged through me, mixing with the sorrow that had become my constant companion. William's gaze dropped to the table, and I could see the shadows of his troubled thoughts flitting across his face. "They were trying to protect you," he said, his voice rising slightly, tinged with desperation. "From the organization." I felt a chill run down my spine. What organization? His eyes finally met mine, and in that moment, I could see the fear etched in his features. They're everywhere, Devon. They prey on people like us. They got to Mom first. She was scared. She tried to keep us safe, but they wouldn't let her go. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I thought I could handle it," he said, his expression shifting from fear to regret. "But they got inside my head. They made me do things. Terrible things." I felt my stomach churn as the pieces began to fit together, but I couldn't let myself believe it. "You're lying. You were always the one who wanted to be part of something bigger, to belong." "No, that's not true," he shouted, slamming his palm against the table, causing me to flinch. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if I did what they said, they would leave us alone, but it just got worse." "Worse how?" I pressed, my voice rising with urgency. "What did they want from you?" "They wanted Mom," he said, his voice dropping again. "She owed them something. They said she was in deep, and if I didn't help them, if I didn't do what they wanted, they'd come after you too." I clenched my jaw, trying to process his words. The gnawing feeling in my gut intensified. "What did they make you do, William?" His eyes widened with a mix of horror and shame. "I didn't want to, Devon, I swear. They made me take care of things, and it spiraled out of control. I thought if I got rid of them, everything would be okay. I thought I could save you." I felt the room closing in on me. "You thought killing them would save me?" I echoed in disbelief. "You killed our family, William." "I thought they were going to hurt you. I thought I was saving you," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "I was scared, Devon. I didn't know what else to do." Just then, the door swung open, and 2 officers entered the room, their expressions unreadable. I looked back at William, my heart breaking for the boy I once loved, now twisted by fear and manipulation. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice trembling. "If you can't give me that, then I don't know if I can help you." William's eyes were wild as he leaned closer, desperation etched across his features. "You have to believe me. I didn't want this. I'll do anything to fix it." As the officers prepared to escort him away, I took one last look at my brother, the remnants of our childhood swirling around us like ghosts. "William, if you're really sorry, then you need to tell everything. You need to bring them down." He nodded vigorously, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "I will. I promise. I'll make it right, Devin. Just trust me." But as they led him away, I was left standing in the cold room, grappling with the reality of our family's dark legacy. The truth felt like a jagged knife in my soul. How well do we truly know our loved ones? In the silence that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead, knowing that the fight for justice had only just begun.